In 1926, a visionary historian named Carter Woodson changed the way America would remember its past. He believed that history was not just a record of powerful kings or famous inventors, it was the heartbeat of a people, the story of their resilience, and the map of their future. At a time when the achievements of African Americans were often ignored or erased, Woodson dared to say, "Our story matters." And with that bold conviction, he founded what he called Negro History Week, a small seed that would grow into what we now know as Black History Month. Woodson's goal was simple but revolutionary: to shine a light on the incredible contributions of African Americans to culture, science, politics, and freedom itself. He wanted schools to teach the truth that Black history is not separate from American history. It is central to it. He carefully chose the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, two figures who symbolized the fight for liberty and justice. At first, only a few schools and communities celebrated this new week. But soon, the idea caught fire. Teachers began incorporating lessons on Black inventors, artists, writers, and leaders. Churches held gatherings to honor the men and women who had fought against slavery and discrimination. Magazines, radio programs, and eventually television began telling stories that had long been silenced. By the 1960s, during the height of the civil rights movement, this celebration evolved into something greater: a month-long tribute to Black excellence and the ongoing struggle for equality. In 1976, President Gerald Ford officially recognized February as Black History Month, urging Americans to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. Since then, every February has carried a theme, from Black resistance to African Americans and the arts, reminding us that the fight for justice and the celebration of culture go hand in hand. Today, Black History Month is more than a commemoration, it is a movement. Across the world, schools, museums, and online platforms share the voices of poets, leaders, scientists, and ordinary individuals who changed history. It is a time to reflect, to learn, and to be inspired by those who came before us. If you believe that every story deserves to be told, if you value truth, courage, and hope, then join us. Hit like, share this video with someone who should know these stories, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we will continue uncovering the untold chapters of history, because remembering the past is not just about looking back. It is about moving forward, united by the lessons that shape who we are. When Woodson conceived the idea of Negro History Week in 1926, he was not just creating a calendar event, he was reclaiming a history that had been forgotten, suppressed, or distorted. He understood that the soul of a people resides in their stories, and that to erase those stories is to silence their existence. To give his vision the deepest resonance, Woodson made a deliberate and symbolic choice. He placed this week of remembrance in February, aligning it with the birthdays of two men whose lives had reshaped the moral fabric of America, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was the leader who steered the nation through its darkest hour, the Civil War. His Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 did not instantly free every enslaved person, but it lit a torch of hope that burned through generations. To millions of African Americans, Lincoln represented not merely a political figure, but a symbol of possibility, the belief that justice, however delayed, could still triumph. Douglass, born into slavery around 1818, escaped its chains and transformed himself into one of the most powerful voices of freedom the world had ever heard. A writer, an orator, and an unflinching activist, Douglass taught that literacy was liberation, that dignity was non-negotiable, and that silence in the face of injustice was itself a betrayal. By placing Negro History Week between their birthdays, Lincoln's on February 12th and Douglas on February 14th, Woodson was weaving symbolism into the fabric of time. The decision was not merely chronological, it was poetic. Lincoln and Douglas had once met in person, and though they came from vastly different worlds, they shared a conviction that the promise of America could never be fulfilled while millions were in bondage. Their conversations, filled with both tension and respect, reflected the struggle of a nation learning to redefine freedom. In this deliberate alignment, Woodson offered a bridge between two legacies: the emancipator and the emancipated, the statesman and the self-liberated man. He wanted each February to remind America that history is built not only by the powerful who write laws, but also by the courageous who dare to live beyond them. The week, therefore, was not about nostalgia. It was a mirror, forcing the nation to look back at what it had been and forward to what it might still become. Schools that first celebrated Negro History Week used this symbolic pairing to ignite curiosity and pride among students who rarely saw themselves reflected in textbooks. Teachers spoke of Lincoln's proclamation, but they also spoke of the courage of men and women who made freedom real in their daily lives, people who built communities, taught children, opened businesses, and fought for the right to vote. They spoke of Douglas S. Ferry's speeches that cut through the hypocrisy of a democracy built on slavery, and how his words still echoed in a century that had yet to deliver full equality. As the years passed, February became more than a commemoration. It became a rhythm pulsing through classrooms, churches, and community centers. Children drew portraits of Lincoln and Douglas side by side, learning that freedom was not a gift but a continuous struggle. Artists painted scenes of the two men meeting in the White House, Lincoln's solemn expression facing Douglas' unyielding gaze, a moment frozen in time that represented the fragile but enduring hope of reconciliation. Woodson believed deeply that historical knowledge could dismantle prejudice. He once said that if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition, and that ignorance of one's past leads to inferiority. By linking the week to Lincoln and Douglas, he was reminding America that the story of black people was not peripheral, it was central to the nation's moral awakening. The week was an invitation to confront uncomfortable truths and to celebrate extraordinary resilience. When the idea spread through black communities across the country, people did not just remember Lincoln and Douglas as distant heroes, they saw them as part of a living legacy. Churches held sermons connecting biblical deliverance to emancipation. Students recited Douglas' words about self-reliance and integrity. Families gathered to tell stories of ancestors who had endured the unthinkable and yet built futures from ashes. Lincoln's image hung beside Douglas' on church walls, sometimes joined by portraits of Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, or Washington, a pantheon of endurance and intellect. This merging of remembrance and reverence gave February its power. It became a month of truth-telling and self-recognition, when a people long marginalized could claim their rightful place in the story of civilization. It was not about erasing pain, but about giving that pain meaning through courage and creativity. The birthdays of Lincoln and Douglas framed this remembrance as both a celebration and a challenge. To remember that freedom must be protected not only by laws, but by conscience. Over time, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, this symbolic week expanded, mirroring the growing insistence that equality could not be postponed. By the 1970s, the movement that began with a historian's dream had become a national observance, Black History Month. Yet the spirit of Woodson's original gesture remained. February still carried the intertwined legacies of two men who, in their own ways, embodied the struggle for human dignity. Every February, when students open books about Lincoln's leadership or Douglas' eloquence, they are stepping into the story that Woodson first sought to preserve. The nation still debates, still wrestles with its conscience, still searches for the unity that these two men once dared to imagine. Their birthdays remind us that progress is not a straight line, but a long and winding journey shaped by courage, vision, and the relentless pursuit of truth. And so, each year, when February arrives and the air carries that quiet sense of remembrance, the connection between Lincoln and Douglas becomes more than historical coincidence. It becomes a dialogue between past and present, a reminder that freedom is both inherited and earned through the choice of those two birthdays. Carter G. Woodson gave America a lesson in symbolism and a legacy of reflection. He turned a week into a movement, a gesture into a tradition, and a date on the calendar into a living reminder that the story of freedom is, and always will be, unfinished. By the time the 1950s and 1960s arrived, America was at a crossroads. The promise of freedom that Lincoln and Douglas had once envisioned still shimmered on the horizon, but it was shadowed by segregation, discrimination, and a painful silence that refused to break. In classrooms, history books still painted only part of the picture. The achievements of African Americans were often reduced to footnotes, their struggles softened or ignored entirely. Yet, beneath that silence, a storm was gathering, a movement that would awaken the conscience of a nation and breathe new life into Carter G. Woodson's dream. The civil rights movement was not born overnight. It was forged in bus boycotts, in the songs sung on dusty roads, in the defiant steps of men and women who refused to accept that the color of their skin determined the value of their lives. From Montgomery to Birmingham, from Greensboro to Selma, the call for justice echoed in voices that refused to be silenced. And as marches filled the streets and the air vibrated with hope and anger, the idea of celebrating Black history began to evolve beyond Woodson's original week. It was no longer enough to dedicate 7 days to centuries of courage and contribution. The movement demanded something larger, something permanent, a recognition that could not be confined by a calendar. Schools, inspired by the courage of the young people who faced down violence and hatred for the right to learn freely, began to transform. Teachers who had once whispered about Black history began to speak it aloud. They introduced their students to names and stories that had never appeared in their textbooks: scientists, artists, soldiers, entrepreneurs, and activists who had built and shaped America in ways that history had chosen to forget. They told of Harriet Tubman's fearless journeys, George Washington Carver's genius with the soil, and the poetry of Langston Hughes that carried the rhythms of resilience. Universities followed. On campuses across the country, students demanded that their education reflect the full truth of their nation's past. They wanted courses in African American studies, spaces to celebrate Black art, and months dedicated to cultural awareness. In their protests and petitions, they carried Woodson's spirit into a new generation. The week he had created out of necessity was expanding through the sheer force of passion and progress. What had once been a quiet observance in February classrooms was now a declaration shouted from podiums and chanted through megaphones. History must belong to everyone. Communities joined in this transformation. Churches, which had always been the heartbeat of social justice movements, began hosting events throughout February to honor Black pioneers. Local radio stations played speeches by Martin Luther King Jr., songs of freedom, and readings from Douglas S. Ferry writings. Neighborhoods organized parades, exhibits, and storytelling nights that celebrated not only survival but triumph. The spirit of the civil rights movement infused every gathering, every classroom, every conversation. The nation was learning, slowly but surely, that remembrance was a form of resistance. In 1963, when King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and declared that he had a dream, it felt as though time itself had folded back to the moment when Lincoln and Douglas once met. The promise of emancipation was being renewed, reinterpreted, and reclaimed by a generation that refused to wait any longer. King's dream was not just of equality before the law, but of recognition of seeing and honoring the humanity of those who had built the very foundations of the country. It was a dream deeply connected to Woodson's mission, to ensure that no one could erase the contributions, creativity, and courage of Black Americans. By the early 1970s, the transformation was undeniable. What had started as Negro History Week was now being celebrated as Black History Month in many schools and communities across the country. Teachers no longer confined their lessons to a single week. Entire months were devoted to exploring the complexities of race, identity, and resilience. Students created murals, essays, and performances that honored both famous figures and local heroes. For the first time, the scope of the celebration matched the magnitude of the legacy. In 1976, when President Gerald Ford officially recognized February as Black History Month, he was not inventing something new, but acknowledging something that had already taken root in the hearts of millions. He called upon Americans to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. His words gave formal recognition to a movement that had been carried by generations of scholars, activists, and dreamers. But even with this official declaration, the true power of Black History Month remained in the hands of the people. It was not simply an institutional observance. It was a living, breathing reminder that progress is never complete. Each February became an invitation to learn, to listen, and to remember that equality requires constant renewal. The civil rights movement had expanded Woodson's Week into a month, but more importantly, it had transformed it into a mindset, a way of seeing history as a shared inheritance rather than a divided story. Through that expansion, the lessons of the past began to shape the aspirations of the present. Children who once felt invisible saw themselves in the pages of history. Communities that had endured generations of exclusion found validation in national recognition. And America, still imperfect and still striving, took another step toward understanding that true freedom is not only the absence of chains, but the presence of truth. The civil rights movement had not merely changed laws, it had changed consciousness. It had given new meaning to Woodson's creation, stretching it beyond the confines of a week into a lasting space where history could breathe. Every February since has carried that same energy, the unbroken thread of defiance, resilience, and hope woven through generations. In the classrooms where students read Douglass and Hughes, in the halls where portraits of Lincoln and King hang side by side, in the quiet pride of those who know their ancestors, stories are finally being told. The legacy continues. And though the journey from Woodson's Week to a national month took decades, its heartbeat has remained the same. A reminder that history is not something we inherit, it is something we build, one truth at a time. Together. By the mid-1970s, the idea that had begun as a quiet, courageous initiative by Carter, Woodson had grown into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. What started as Negro History Week had traversed decades, carried forward by generations of educators, students, and activists who refused to let the achievements and struggles of African Americans be relegated to obscurity. The momentum of the civil rights movement had expanded the observance, infusing it with energy, purpose, and a broader understanding of justice and equality. And now the nation was poised to recognize this effort in a more formal way. It was in this context that President Gerald Ford, in 1976, took a historic step by officially declaring February as Black History Month, urging all Americans to honor the countless contributions of Black citizens across every field of endeavor. Ford's declaration was not merely ceremonial. It was a recognition of decades of persistence, courage, and relentless advocacy. It acknowledged that the stories, achievements, and cultural heritage of African Americans were not peripheral to the American narrative but central to it. For years, classrooms had struggled to integrate these lessons fully. Communities had worked tirelessly to preserve and celebrate local heroes, and historians had labored to document what mainstream history often ignored. By placing the weight of presidential authority behind this recognition, Ford gave legitimacy to a movement that had already transformed hearts and minds at the grassroots level, providing both a symbolic and practical affirmation that Black history deserved a permanent, respected place in the national consciousness. What made Ford's declaration so compelling was that it was the culmination of a long journey, one that began with the simple but revolutionary notion that Black history matters. Carter G. Woodson, in creating Negro History Week, had planted the seed. He had chosen February to align with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, linking the observance to figures whose lives symbolized the struggle for freedom and equality. Over the decades, schools had expanded the celebration, and the civil rights movement had infused it with urgency and visibility. Communities had embraced the observance, hosting exhibitions, storytelling events, and lectures that elevated the voices of those who had often been silenced. By the time Ford signed the official recognition, Black History Month had already become a living tradition, and his words served to cement its importance at the highest level of American society. The President's proclamation encouraged Americans to learn and reflect, to move beyond superficial acknowledgement toward deeper engagement with the stories of resilience, creativity, and leadership that had shaped the nation. He called attention not only to historical figure scientists, educators, artists, and political leaders, but also to ordinary men and women whose courage, persistence, and innovation had quietly yet profoundly influenced their communities. The month was a call to recognize that history is not a static record, but a dynamic narrative shaped by people who defy adversity and contribute meaningfully to the collective life of a nation. By placing the observance in the hands of the public, Ford was asking citizens to participate in an ongoing act of remembrance and validation, bridging the past with the present. In classrooms across the country, teachers found renewed purpose. Black History Month became more than a calendar event. It became a framework for storytelling, critical thinking, and cultural appreciation. Students studied the lives of figures like Harriet Tubman, who navigated the treacherous paths of the Underground Railroad with courage and ingenuity, and George Washington Carver, whose scientific innovations transformed agriculture and industry. They read the speeches of Frederick Douglass, whose eloquence and moral clarity challenged the conscience of a nation, and learned about the artistic brilliance of Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and other luminaries of the Harlem Renaissance. Through these lessons, young people came to understand that history is not merely dates and events, but lived experiences that resonate across generations. Communities, too, felt the impact of Ford's proclamation. Churches, libraries, museums, and civic organizations organized lectures, exhibitions, and performances, transforming February into a period of shared cultural exploration. Local leaders highlighted unsung heroes, from civil rights activists to inventors and entrepreneurs who had contributed to the social and economic fabric of their neighborhoods. The month became a vehicle for intergenerational dialogue, where elders recounted stories of struggle and triumph, passing wisdom and pride to younger generations. In this way, Black History Month served as a connective tissue between past and present, offering a tangible link between individual lives and the broader sweep of history. Ford's recognition also carried international significance, signaling to the world that the United States acknowledged both the injustices of the past and the value of addressing them through education and remembrance. It demonstrated a willingness to confront the complexity of the nation's history openly, and to celebrate the achievements of a community that had endured centuries of oppression. The declaration encouraged scholarship, artistic expression, and civic engagement, fostering an environment in which Black voices could be amplified, studied, and celebrated in ways that were historically unprecedented. Even decades later, the spirit of Ford's proclamation continues to resonate. Each February, Black History Month reminds Americans of the intertwined legacies of Lincoln, Douglas, Woodson, and the countless individuals who fought for recognition, justice, and opportunity. It is a time to honor not only the visible leaders but also the unseen, everyday acts of courage and creativity that have sustained communities and inspired progress. The month serves as a living testament to the idea that history is not only inherited but cultivated through remembrance, reflection, and the ongoing pursuit of equity. By officially recognizing Black History Month, Gerald Ford transformed a growing cultural observance into a national institution, providing a platform for education, reflection, and celebration. His declaration acknowledged the historical significance of African Americans' contributions while reinforcing the idea that understanding history is essential to shaping a just and inclusive society. It linked the original vision of Carter, Woodson with the ongoing legacy of the civil rights movement, creating continuity between past efforts to honor Black achievement and present endeavors to embed those lessons into the national consciousness. Through this act, the nation was reminded that Black history is not a niche subject to be celebrated in isolation, but an integral part of the American story, deserving of recognition, respect, and deep engagement by all citizens. While Black History Month began in the United States as a bold effort by Carter G. Woodson to ensure that African American contributions were remembered and celebrated, its influence quickly began to ripple beyond national borders, eventually inspiring other countries to recognize and honor the stories of Black communities within their own histories. In Canada, for example, educators and activists observed that the struggles, resilience, and cultural achievements of Black Canadians had long been marginalized or ignored in textbooks and public discourse. By the late 20th century, the idea of dedicating a month to highlight Black history gained traction, and February was adopted, mirroring the American calendar, yet tailored to reflect Canadian contexts and the unique stories of its Black population. Schools, universities, museums, and cultural organizations began hosting events, lectures, and exhibitions that showcased figures from slavery, migration, activism, and the arts, emphasizing that Black history is not only about oppression but also about creativity, leadership, and community building. Across the Atlantic, the story took a slightly different rhythm. In the United Kingdom, Ireland, and the Netherlands, the histories of Black communities were shaped by centuries of colonialism, migration, and trade, with unique local contexts that demanded a different framing of commemoration. These nations eventually embraced Black History Month, but unlike the United States and Canada, they chose to celebrate it in October. The timing allowed schools, cultural institutions, and governments to anchor the observance in the academic year, giving it a rhythm that connected seamlessly with the lives of students and communities. The adoption of October as the month of recognition in Europe was also strategic. It provided an opportunity to reflect on the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, colonial histories, and the contributions of African and Caribbean communities within these nations, allowing for a narrative that was both historical and contemporary. In the UK, for instance, Black History Month became a platform for exploring the stories of African, Caribbean, and Black British individuals whose lives had often been neglected in mainstream history. Museums hosted exhibitions on abolitionists and pioneers in the arts and sciences, while schools integrated lessons about the Windrush generation, anti-colonial movements, and the civil rights struggles that reverberated internationally. Ireland's approach emphasized inclusion and awareness, encouraging young people to engage with the stories of Black immigrants, activists, and thinkers who had shaped modern Irish society. Similarly, in the Netherlands, educators and cultural organizations highlighted both the legacies of Dutch colonialism in the Caribbean and Africa and the ongoing contributions of Black Dutch citizens to arts, politics, and community development. What made this international expansion particularly compelling was how it underscored the universality of Woodson's original mission. While the specifics of history varied, the underlying principle was consistent. Societies flourish when they recognize and honor the contributions of all their members, particularly those whose voices have been marginalized or silenced. The adoption of Black History Month in these countries reflected a growing global awareness that history is not a monolith and that the stories of Black people are integral to national identities everywhere. It also created a shared rhythm of reflection and celebration, allowing diasporic communities to connect across borders, share experiences, and celebrate cultural heritage in a global context. In classrooms across Canada and Europe, students began to encounter the lives and achievements of Black figures in ways that challenged the narrow narratives they had previously received. They learned about abolitionists, writers, scientists, and political leaders whose work shaped the moral and cultural landscapes of their countries. Beyond the classroom, community centers and libraries organized performances, lectures, and storytelling sessions, inviting audiences of all ages to engage directly with these histories. For many, Black History Month became an opportunity to explore not just the past but also the present, highlighting ongoing struggles against inequality and celebrating contemporary achievements in arts, politics, and social activism. One of the most profound outcomes of this international observance was the way it created networks of knowledge and cultural exchange. Schools in the UK and Canada partnered with American institutions, sharing lesson plans, research, and resources to deepen understanding. Museums coordinated exhibitions that traveled across countries, allowing visitors to experience narratives that transcended borders. Cultural festivals brought music, art, and storytelling to public spaces, creating a festive atmosphere that underscored both pride and education. The narratives of slavery, colonialism, migration, and resilience were no longer isolated histories. They became part of a shared conversation about human dignity, justice, and creativity. Despite the geographical differences in timing, the observance of Black History Month across these nations carried a consistent message: that acknowledging history is an act of empowerment, that honoring contributions of marginalized communities strengthens the social fabric, and that education can bridge divides between past injustices and future possibilities. By framing these histories in ways that were relevant to local communities while maintaining a connection to broader diasporic experiences, Canada, the UK, Ireland, and the Netherlands demonstrated that the principles Woodson championed were universally resonant. Over time, Black History Month evolved into more than a period of reflection. It became a dynamic platform for activism, artistic expression, and civic engagement. Exhibitions, school programs, public lectures, and cultural events did not merely recount history. They prompted dialogue about race, equality, and representation in the present day. Young people could see themselves in the stories of Black pioneers and visionaries, cultivating a sense of identity and belonging. Communities were reminded of the power of storytelling and society at large was challenged to confront histories of exclusion while celebrating achievements that had too often been overlooked. This international adoption also highlighted the adaptability of the observance. While the United States had chosen February to align with the birthdays of Lincoln and Douglas, European countries selected October to suit their own historical and educational contexts, showing that the essence of Black History Month lies not in rigid dates, but in the recognition and celebration of Black lives, contributions, and resilience. It is a reminder that history is living and that the stories of courage, creativity, and endurance can inspire societies anywhere, at any. Through this expansion, the vision that Carter Woodson planted nearly a century ago had become a global movement. What had begun as a small, courageous week of remembrance in classrooms and communities in the United States now resonated across continents, connecting people through shared histories and shared aspirations. By adopting Black History Month, Canada, the UK, Ireland, and the Netherlands acknowledged that understanding the past is essential for shaping a just and inclusive future, and that the stories of Black communities are not peripheral, they are central to the ongoing human story. As Black History Month grew from Woodson's original week into a full-fledged national and international observance, the organizers and educators recognized that it was not enough to merely celebrate the presence of Black history. The month needed to tell a story, to evolve, and to offer fresh perspectives that could resonate with each new generation. To achieve this, the concept of annual themes emerged, giving focus and depth to the celebrations while ensuring that the month remained dynamic and relevant. These themes were more than slogans or catchphrases, they were invitations to explore the many layers of Black life, achievement, and struggle, connecting the past with the present and inspiring reflection on the future. A theme such as Black resistance, which marked 2023, was not merely a retrospective glance at historical acts of defiance. It was a call to recognize the enduring courage that defined generations of African Americans who, against overwhelming odds, refused to be silenced, enslaved, or marginalized. The stories highlighted under this theme encompassed not only the well-known figures of civil rights history, but also the countless ordinary people whose daily acts of resilience and defiance quietly reshaped communities, workplaces, and social norms. In exploring a theme like Black resistance, schools, cultural institutions, and media outlets invited audiences to engage with narratives that went beyond textbooks, offering rich, nuanced accounts of the strategies, sacrifices, and innovations that characterized resistance movements from the era of slavery through the 20th century and into contemporary times. Students might study the courage of enslaved individuals who risked their lives to escape bondage, the bravery of women like Harriet Tubman who guided hundreds to freedom, or the strategic genius of leaders who organized boycotts, sit-ins, and marches to challenge entrenched systems of oppression. Communities could host exhibitions, theatrical performances, or oral history projects that amplified voices previously overlooked, drawing attention to the ways in which resistance shaped not only Black communities but the moral and social landscape of entire nations. Through these narratives, Black resistance became both a historical study and a lens through which to examine ongoing struggles for equality and justice, linking past acts of courage with present challenges and triumphs. The following year, the focus might shift dramatically, as it did in 2024 with the theme African Americans and the Arts. This theme illuminated a different facet of the Black experience, emphasizing creativity, innovation, and cultural expression as vital components of history and identity. By centering the arts, the celebration highlighted how music, literature, visual arts, theater, and dance became channels for both personal expression and social commentary, reflecting the joys, sorrows, and aspirations of communities that had long been silenced in mainstream cultural narratives. From the rhythms of jazz and blues to the literary brilliance of Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, from the visual poetry of contemporary Black artists to the dynamic performances of dancers and actors who broke barriers, the theme underscored that the arts are not mere embellishments of history, they are vessels for storytelling, activism, and transformation. In classrooms and cultural centers, students and visitors could engage in creative workshops, performances, and lectures that not only celebrated artistic achievement but also traced its roots in social, political, and historical contexts, illustrating the inseparable connection between culture and community resilience. The use of yearly themes also allowed educators and organizers to bridge the local and the global, connecting specific historical moments to contemporary issues while highlighting the ongoing impact of African American contributions. A single theme could be adapted to highlight local heroes, community-based art initiatives, or contemporary resistance movements, making history feel immediate, alive, and personally relevant. The themes encouraged reflection on how historical patterns repeat or evolve, prompting audiences to consider how the courage, creativity, and innovation of the past inform present-day struggles for equality, representation, and opportunity. Through the lens of annual themes, Black History Month became a multifaceted dialogue rather than a static observance. It invited individuals and communities to consider how slavery, segregation, migration, and cultural innovation intersected to shape identity, society, and governance. Teachers could design lesson plans that compared historical forms of resistance with modern activism. Museums could curate exhibitions that juxtaposed historical art with contemporary interpretations, and community centers could host storytelling sessions that connected generational experiences, allowing older generations to pass knowledge, wisdom, and pride to younger audiences. The continuity of themes ensured that each year was not merely a repetition of the last, but an opportunity to explore fresh dimensions of history, culture, and social dynamics. Moreover, the thematic approach emphasized the interconnectedness of African American experiences across time and space. It encouraged an understanding that history is not a series of isolated events but a tapestry woven from struggles, triumphs, and expressions of identity, creativity, and resilience. By focusing on specific aspects each year, from resistance to art, science, politics, or community leadership, Black History Month highlighted the complexity and richness of African American contributions, offering a narrative that was both inclusive and deeply human. Audiences were reminded that history is not just a record of dates and figures but a living story shaped by decisions, courage, and imagination. In this way, themes like Black resistance and African Americans and the arts provide structure and focus without limiting the breadth of the stories that can be told. They challenge educators, students, artists, and communities to dig deeper, to find the connections between past and present, and to celebrate both well-known icons and unsung heroes. These annual focal points ensure that Black History Month remains dynamic, evolving with society's understanding of history while continually highlighting the ingenuity, bravery, and creativity of African Americans. Each theme offers a lens to examine how historical events resonate in contemporary life, how cultural contributions shape societal values, and how resilience manifests across generations. By framing Black History Month around yearly themes, the observance transcends mere commemoration. It becomes an active, participatory experience, fostering education, dialogue, and reflection that connect individual experiences to broader social narratives. Through focused exploration of topics like resistance and the arts, the month underscores the enduring impact of African Americans on every aspect of society, demonstrating that history is not static but a living, breathing continuum shaped by courage, creativity, and determination. In this way, the themes ensure that Black History Month remains not only a celebration of the past, but also a guide for understanding the present and imagining a more inclusive future. Preserving the spirit of Carter, Woodson's original vision, while adapting it to the evolving story of a people and their profound contributions to the world. As Black History Month became firmly established in classrooms, communities, and national consciousness, the ways in which people celebrated and engaged with it grew increasingly vibrant and diverse. It was no longer a matter of reading from a textbook or attending a single lecture. The observance had evolved into a rich tapestry of activities that sought to bring the stories, struggles, and triumphs of African Americans to life in ways that could be experienced, felt, and remembered. Museums, for example, became living spaces of history, transforming their galleries into immersive journeys through time. Exhibitions might trace the harrowing paths of enslaved individuals, highlighting both the brutality they endured and the remarkable ingenuity they displayed in carving out spaces of freedom and community. Other exhibits celebrated the inventiveness and artistry of African Americans, displaying everything from the technological breakthroughs of Black inventors to the creative genius of painters, sculptors, and fashion designers whose work had long been marginalized or misattributed. These museum spaces allowed visitors to move through history physically, engaging with artifacts, documents, and multimedia displays that contextualized each story within the broader sweep of American and global history. Lectures became another cornerstone of the celebration, offering opportunities to hear directly from historians, activists, and community leaders who could provide context, analysis, and personal insight that textbooks could never fully convey. Audiences were drawn into discussions that connected historical events with contemporary issues, exploring how the legacies of slavery, segregation, and discrimination continue to influence society today. Lecturers would often highlight figures both famous and unsung, from civil rights leaders and political pioneers to local educators, artists, and entrepreneurs whose contributions shaped neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces. These sessions provided a forum for reflection and dialogue, encouraging participants not only to learn but also to question, discuss, and internalize the lessons embedded in the narratives. Documentaries and film screenings further expanded the reach of Black History Month, combining visual storytelling with historical scholarship to create compelling narratives that engaged audiences on multiple levels. From films about the Underground Railroad to documentaries exploring the Harlem Renaissance or the Civil Rights Movement, these screenings brought history into living rooms, classrooms, and community centers, offering viewers a sense of immediacy and connection to the people and events being depicted. Filmmakers often included interviews with historians, descendants of historical figures, and contemporary activists, weaving together past and present in a way that underscored the continuity of struggle, resilience, and achievement. These cinematic experiences complemented lectures and museum exhibits, allowing viewers to witness history in motion and feel its resonance in their own lives. School programs became particularly dynamic, providing young people with immersive experiences that combined education with creativity and participation. Teachers designed lessons and projects that encouraged students to explore local and national history, from conducting oral history interviews with elders in their communities to creating art, music, or theater inspired by historical events and figures. Assemblies and school-wide performances allowed students to present their findings and creative work, giving their peers and families a chance to engage with Black history in interactive and personal ways. Through these programs, students not only learned about the achievements of African Americans, but also developed a sense of agency, recognizing that their own voices and stories could contribute to the ongoing narrative of their communities. Art showcases further highlighted the cultural richness of African American communities, celebrating creativity as both a reflection of identity and a form of resistance. Galleries, cultural centers, and public spaces featured exhibitions of painting, sculpture, photography, dance, and performance art, often curated to explore themes connected to historical or contemporary social issues. These showcases honored both established and emerging artists, emphasizing that Black excellence spans generations and disciplines. Visitors could engage with works that spoke of joy, struggle, innovation, and resilience, gaining a deeper understanding of how artistic expression both shapes and reflects the lived experiences of African Americans. By framing art as an essential component of history, these showcases reinforced the idea that culture and creativity are inseparable from the broader narrative of achievement and resistance. Community events often blended these educational and artistic elements, creating spaces where reflection, celebration, and dialogue intersected. Local libraries hosted storytelling sessions, workshops, and book readings that highlighted both historical accounts and contemporary works by Black authors. Civic organizations organized panel discussions, performances, and film screenings that engaged residents across age groups, fostering intergenerational learning and appreciation. Churches and cultural centers became hubs for celebrations, lectures, and artistic performances, emphasizing both spiritual and cultural continuity. These communal activities allowed participants to move beyond passive observation, encouraging active engagement with history and culture, while strengthening social bonds and a sense of shared identity. The combination of these activities created a multifaceted experience that allowed Black History Month to resonate across communities, regions, and even nations. It was no longer a static observance or a simple commemoration. It became a living, breathing tradition that encouraged people to see history as interconnected, dynamic, and deeply relevant. Museums, lectures, documentaries, school programs, and art showcases provided multiple entry points, enabling participants to engage intellectually, emotionally, and creatively. Each activity reinforced the others, creating a comprehensive approach that honored both the well-known figures and the countless unsung heroes whose lives had shaped history. Through these immersive and varied experiences, Black History Month ensured that the stories of African Americans were not only remembered, but celebrated in ways that could be felt and understood on multiple levels. It became a platform for education, reflection, and inspiration, offering participants the opportunity to explore history as a living dialogue rather than a static record. By combining scholarship, creativity, and community engagement, the month illuminated the full spectrum of Black excellence, demonstrating that history is not merely a collection of past events but a vibrant and ongoing story, one that continues to shape identity, culture, and society in profound ways. Ultimately, the richness and diversity of Black History Month activities reaffirmed Carter and Woodson's original vision, that understanding and celebrating Black contributions is essential not only for African Americans but for society as a whole. By engaging with history through museums, lectures, documentaries, schools, and art, people of all backgrounds are invited to witness the resilience, creativity, and enduring impact of African Americans, ensuring that the lessons of the past continue to inspire and inform the present and the future. as Black History Month continues to be observed across the United States and beyond. It has grown into far more than a period of commemoration. It has become a powerful platform for reflection, education, and social transformation. While its origins trace back to Carter, Woodson's vision of Negro History Week, the month-long observance now embodies a broader mission to promote racial equality, amplify voices, and draw connections between the struggles of the past and the challenges that remain today. Every February, individuals, schools, museums, and communities come together not only to honor the achievements of African Americans, but also to confront the enduring legacy of systemic inequality that continues to shape society. By exploring history through the lens of resistance, innovation, and cultural expression, Black History Month reminds us that progress is never automatic. It is earned through persistent effort, dialogue, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. The promotion of racial equality through Black History Month is particularly significant because it encourages participants to examine the structures and attitudes that have historically marginalized Black communities. From slavery and segregation to economic disparities and unequal access to education, African Americans have faced systemic obstacles that have demanded extraordinary resilience and resourcefulness. By studying these historical contexts, learners of all ages gain a deeper understanding of the roots of inequality, which in turn fosters empathy, awareness, and action. Black History Month is therefore not just a historical exercise, it is an invitation to envision a society in which justice, opportunity, and respect are extended to all. Through school programs, public lectures, and community events, participants are encouraged to explore ways in which they can contribute to this vision, whether through advocacy, mentorship, or simply by challenging bias in their everyday lives. Amplifying Black voices is another critical dimension of the observance. Across classrooms, media outlets, cultural institutions, and social platforms, Black History Month provides a stage for stories that have too often been overlooked or misrepresented. These stories span centuries and disciplines, encompassing political leadership, artistic innovation, scientific discovery, and grassroots activism. By highlighting these voices, the month fosters recognition and validation, showing that African Americans have been and continue to be central architects of the social, cultural, and intellectual landscape. From the eloquence of Frederick Douglass to the artistry of contemporary musicians, from the courage of civil rights activists to the pioneering work of Black scientists and inventors, each story contributes to a broader understanding of human achievement and the richness of cultural heritage. In sharing these narratives widely, Black History Month helps ensure that they are neither forgotten nor minimized, allowing Black voices to inform national and global conversations about history, identity, and social responsibility. Equally important is the way Black History Month links historical struggles to contemporary issues. The fight for civil rights, the efforts to dismantle segregation, and the countless acts of resistance and innovation that have defined African American history are not relics of a distant past, they resonate with ongoing challenges today. Discussions during the month often examine issues such as racial profiling, disparities in healthcare and education, voting rights, representation in government, and access to economic opportunity. By connecting historical struggles with present-day realities, Black History Month provides a framework for understanding systemic inequality and inspires action to address it. These conversations underscore the idea that history is not merely a series to be memorized but a continuum that informs current societal dynamics and shapes the possibilities for the future. In addition to education and dialogue, Black History Month encourages creative expression and community engagement as essential tools for empowerment and reflection. Cultural performances, art exhibitions, poetry readings, and film screenings allow participants to engage emotionally and intellectually with the themes of resilience, identity, and innovation. Schools and community organizations host workshops, storytelling sessions, and public discussions that bring together multiple generations, fostering intergenerational learning and mutual respect. Through these experiences, the month becomes a space not only for learning but also for connection, empathy, and collective celebration. The arts, in particular, serve as a bridge between past and present, allowing audiences to feel the depth of historical experiences while reflecting on contemporary challenges and triumphs. Black History Month also reinforces the importance of leadership, advocacy, and civic engagement. By studying the lives of individuals who challenged injustice and worked to transform society, participants are reminded that change is possible when people act with courage, vision, and persistence. These stories encourage younger generations to see themselves as capable of contributing to their communities and the broader world, while inspiring adults to continue advocating for equity and justice. The month's observances highlight that social transformation is a collective effort that requires awareness, dialogue, and sustained commitment across all sectors of society. Ultimately, Black History Month stands as a testament to the resilience, creativity, and enduring impact of African Americans. It is a celebration of achievements across fields of endeavor, a recognition of past and present struggles, and a call to action for a more just and inclusive society. By promoting racial equality, amplifying Black voices, and connecting historical struggles to contemporary issues, the month challenges each of us to consider our role in shaping the world around us. It reminds us that history is not a passive record, but a living dialogue that informs our actions, decisions, and aspirations. As we reflect on these stories and lessons, we are invited to participate actively in this ongoing legacy. Whether through learning, sharing, advocating, or creating, each individual has the opportunity to honor the spirit of Black History Month. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this history, for listening to these stories, and for contributing in your own way to a culture of awareness, respect, and empowerment. If you found this journey through Black history inspiring, educational, or thought-provoking, please consider supporting this channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others. By doing, you help amplify these important narratives, ensure that the lessons of the past continue to resonate, and join in the collective effort to celebrate Black excellence and promote equality for all.